So hi, Danielle. Thank you so much for being on HR Heroes. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me, Molly.
No problem. So I think I'll probably get started today with the first question to sort of kick things off, which is why HR?
It's not going to be a quick answer, that one. It was never the plan. I'll start by saying that. Prior to being in people, I was operating within the leadership team in finance, and I was doing that for about 10 years. About 6 years ago, so kind of well into my career, I had a bit of a pivot, a lot of a pivot, and moved from finance into people, and specifically into reward. So I do believe that I have ended up exactly where I'm meant to be, and I think the finance experience, that has been, there's loads of brilliant transferable skills that I have been able to bring to people as a result of that experience. So I don't look at it as time spent wasted or anything like that. So I guess my perception of what HR or a people function looked like has been quite different to kind of my lived experience now. I have fundamentally, why HR is because I am able to have an impact on people's lives. That's what it boils down to. If you strip away, all of the policies, procedures, ER, strip. Fundamentally, it's about people, helping people, and my role, particularly as a reward leader, is facilitating a value exchange, basically between employees and business, and getting those to a place where it's aligned. So, why HR? Why not? It's such an exciting function to be a part of. It's super stimulating. It's very challenging. You have to be quite creative, innovative. If you care a lot, it is the function to be in. So yeah, I would absolutely recommend it, by the way, to anyone.
Yeah, love that. I mean, it's really interesting, Danielle, because I think it's a story that we often hear is kind of on this podcast specifically, is like, why HR? And no one yet, I don't think, has said that they were kind of aspiring to work in that function. Everyone's sort of kind of fallen into it. But what's particularly interesting is that I think everyone, myself included, before I sort of worked in the employee engagement space, has this perception of HR that's very different to seemingly what the lived experience is. So it's really interesting to get kind of a window into your life and your experience, and kind of the fact that you've moved from one function to the other and actually seen that it's where you fit, and maybe you hadn't seen yourself previously, but do you find it very stimulating and challenging? And I think it'd be interesting to touch more on kind of the reward side of things and what that kind of entails, because there are so many different hats that the people team can wear in different specialisms. So did you kind of, when you pivoted into HR, go directly into reward from finance, because that fitted quite well?
I did, but I did so on the basis of what I looked after in finance. So predominantly my background started in payroll. So worked through to being senior payroll manager, and then my remit kind of exponentially grew. So took on things like cash and bank, business administration, sales ledger, purchase ledger. So the expenses, all of the lots of different kind of subsets of finance. It was ultimately a transactional finance manager. So, but that included clearly a career of being in payroll, working through pay, and then ultimately managing the function of it. So what happened within my business was ultimately the business, it wasn't just a shift from me personally, the business shifted how it thought about pay. And I actually put forward a proposal that was, this is what I think we're missing at the moment. And I think that's the collaboration of people and finance. And I would like to pivot, but I think the business needs to think about this in a much more strategic way. So that's how that transition was managed. So I lost some of those subsets within finance. I moved into people, and the payroll function that had historically within this business always sat within finance, moved to people along with me. So whilst at that time I wasn't operating the payroll, I was kind of holistically looking after it. But what that allowed for me to do in a strategic reward space is have real close links to the data, real close links to the analysis and the operations of pay and reward. And clearly all those levels of legislation and taxation, that's super important also to the way we recognise and incentivise our teams. But then also go much more holistically and then fit our agenda into a people strategy instead of a purely operations kind of function. So that's how that came about.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the strategic transition bit is really key in terms of actually how do we, because I always say that the people team are basically like a linchpin or a connection between the people and the business. And often you're on the ground, you're hearing what people have to say, but you're also acutely aware of the direction in which the business is going. And so to kind of have that finger on the pulse and be kind of straddling both functions and knowing kind of what the people team need, but also what the finance team need is really interesting. And I guess, you know, we've spoken before and you're really strong in kind of your proposal writing and you're really passionate about data. So it would be interesting to kind of know what that proposal looked like or kind of what you were looking at from a business perspective to sort of tie that into the reward side of things.
So I was kind of looking at the way we did things in our organization, and at that time, so we're talking maybe 2019 here, it was, we were very much still in that antiquated employee life cycle. You know, we weren't necessarily thinking about that, the value exchange I referenced earlier. You know, who are we as an employer? What do we offer? You know, really thinking about that EVP. I'd gone to I'd attended a conference, and it kind of really opened up my mind to thinking about pay and reward in a much more forward-thinking sense. You know, pull this lever and this can happen. So my proposal at that point was, we have within our organization at that time, we were tracking at over 100% turnover. It's we have been in the late 120s, 130s at a time. We are typically, because it's a hospitality industry, low pay in terms of median UK earnings. So and everything felt quite disjointed. So I was seeing initiatives that were being created by commercial teams or by area managers, you know, very specific geographical concentration, or and essentially one of the things that I did was look at one of the incentives that we had been driving and pushing, and it was something that we had done for many years, and And it was at quite a substantial cost. You know, it was hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of pay, additional pay that was going through to our frontline team members by way of hitting certain targets. And when I did a bit of analysis on it, and I kind of sat there and I thought, how has no one done this analysis before? Because it was actually costing us. So the net value of the revenue that this behavior was essentially driving, the revenue less the cost of what it was to generate said revenue, we were in deficit, right? So it was a non-starter, and this is something that we'd been doing for a period of time. So whilst it was an effective instrument, I'm sure when it was first introduced, it was no longer that, and therefore my proposal at that time was, we've got a couple of £100,000 here. Actually, what we could do is consider becoming a non-minimum wage paying employer for those types of funds. We could implement a really meaningful benefits platform, or we could invest in our matrix structure to make us more competitive in market, make that encourage that progression, that career development, that retention piece. And so it then became, that was a very real, that was a very easy, yes, okay, we will stop spending that money that isn't making us any money, as clearly, any CFO is going to be take that out. But then it became this is what we should be exploring instead. It's never the people finance kind of scales for me are making sure we are operating in the realms of what is feasible for a business resource, but making sure every initiative, every pound that the business spends is ultimately for an equal benefit for the people in which it's employing and also the business, that it makes sense in that way. So yeah,
which ties in really nicely to exactly what you said at the start about it being that value exchange, and you facilitating that value exchange of redistributing those funds so that it equally benefits both parties. And it's interesting that you kind of zoom out or zoom in really actually and really look at the detail and identify all of these costs that were kind of being mismanaged and reassigning them to the right place. So that's really
and that's kind of it's a zoom in, but then fundamentally a huge zoom out. It's when that analogy, when you're on the dance floor, you can't really see, you've got to get onto the balcony, right? And you've got to look down and what exactly is going on here? What can we say that there is a behavior change or and this is in performance related pay, right? So this is not everything related to a reward, which I think that's a really important distinction. Reward covers lots of facets. This is particularly performance related pay, but it is, and that's why fundamentally, to be fair, that's why I love reward, because it does touch on so many facets within people. There are, and I think I said this when we spoke first, and I've certainly written about it, that it is like the golden thread that connects everything together. Reward is at a base level how we are paying, how we are paying and recognizing and rewarding our teams, but it's also the cultures that we create, the development opportunities that we provide, the engagement, the affinity that we, it is the golden thread that goes through all of those elements of people, or HR functions. So that's why it's quite an exciting proposition to be involved in.
Yeah, I love that analogy, the golden thread. I mean, it fits in so nicely because, again, on the golden side of things as well, that pay element as well ties in quite nicely to it. But I think it's a fantastic way to look at it, and kind of, again, it just highlights how holistic it can be as reward, and kind of, like you say, zooming out, and there's so much more to it rather than just the pay side of things, which is interesting. We might have covered this a little bit already, but if you could kind of go back to the start of your career in HR and reward, like, what is one piece of advice that you wish you'd known, or that you'd give to someone who would be in a similar position now?
I would say embrace change. Embrace change, and the most important thing, I think, is horizon scanning. So that kind of the analogy that I mentioned about, getting up on the balcony and off the dance floor. I think we are so often in the weeds, and this is in any organization, we are so busy doing the doing that the opportunity to step away and kind of consider, why are we doing what we're doing, what else is out there, what else is coming, what, that full scan of the horizon. You're never going to be able to keep up with a changing market if you're only operating at the point in which it commences. You have to be, so embracing that change, embracing what's new, not being afraid of it, but actively seeking it.
Yeah, no, that's really important. So almost being proactive with changes to the market, like you say, scanning the horizon and seeing what's coming, and being innovative and proactive rather than being reactive, whereby you're so lost in the weeds that when you look up, suddenly you've got to pivot again without any kind of preparation or anticipation of that.
Yeah. And when you're reactive, you are less likely to be able to allocate, budget and resources in a very measured way. You are more reactive in that sense, rather than looking ahead. Yeah.
And that pre-planning as well plays into it, doesn't it? Because sometimes it might be like you look up and it's like, oh, well, this is happening, so now we need to implement this solution, and suddenly it's like, there's no timelines or planning, or, like you say, budget assigned to it, so it's really difficult to actually get that solution into the business, even though it's going to benefit the business. Whereas, as you say, if you can anticipate this is going to happen, these are the future trends, this is how we can kind of respond to those trends before they've even become an issue or a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and for reward, what I think that looks like, as I say, it's that from my point of view, certainly within the scope of my role, it is that golden thread, but it's about connecting kind of what I see on the horizon for reward is that much bigger kind of strategic reward mindset of businesses, as clearly as costs keep exponentially rising, that the cost of doing business, whether it's people or products, whatever it is. So we are having to be really really strategic in where we place our expenditure, but make sure that is aligned with what people are ultimately wanting, and that includes clearly quite heavily sustainability, and that's where I think reward is ultimately, I look after sustainability within my remit. It feels more like a CSR type of overview. So really looking at reward as being completely interlinked and almost dependent on, or the curator of, full corporate responsibility, sustainability, sustainable workforces, fair and proper practices, fair and equal pay, democratizing learning, etc. So all of well-being, financial well-being, DEI, all of that stuff that falls, you know, really nicely within ESGs and CSR more holistically. That's where I see strategic reward really playing a part in the years ahead. And I think that's where the investment in strategic reward can be really quite profound for business.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because admittedly myself, like, I hadn't even thought about sustainability playing into a reward function from that perspective. Like, you think that might sit somewhere else within the business, but actually, like you say, that golden thread piece,
Exactly.
and it's putting it all into the people, then it makes sense.
Yeah, it's a real it's a real beautiful kind of mix. So and again, it's about that balance between kind of business and individuals, and that's the critical piece that you play as a reward professional, in terms of making sure that the business investment is doing what the business needs and is driving the behaviours that the business wants and the outputs and performance that the business wants and needs, but also making sure that from an individual perspective, from a community perspective, from a societal perspective, you know, it is being placed in the right ways, supporting in the right ways, impacting in the ways that individuals, you know, need and want it to. So it's you are almost the advocate for both parties, and that's why I think the finance link, getting back to that, is, I don't want to say kind of critical, because it's not, right? My pathway has been quite unusual, I accept that, but I think it has fundamentally enabled me to do my job better, you know. And I think that an understanding, at least at a base level, is essential.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, you've put it so eloquently in terms of being able to, like, manage the relationships between the two sides, right? And if you've got an understanding of both parties, and you can be empathetic with what the people in the community desire, but also have a really critical understanding of what the business needs, or where the business needs to go, or what their priorities are, and how you can link the two, just enables you to better perform in your role.
Exactly.
Have you ever found it kind of difficult, or kind of a bit conflicting, trying to kind of manage the relationship between the two, and like wanting to do the right for both sides, but actually maybe being pulled in one direction where maybe they're not aligning?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the reality, you know, and I'm sure many people, professionals, I have been, I don't want to say lucky, because it's purposeful, you know, and there is a lot of work that goes into the presentation of initiatives and strategy, you know, for ultimately for the business's consideration. So, but I have been fortunate that lots of the proposals that I have put forward actually have been signed off fairly easily, to be quite honest, because I have been able to directly link the investment with an output, you know, from the offset. And in most instances, interventions that I have implemented actually are at a business saving. So that's the interesting thing. This isn't always about the business spending money, or increasing, you know, budget allocations. It is more often than not, in my experience, using the same money in a better way or in a different way. That is also the role of a kind of senior reward professional in terms of negotiations, external partnerships. There's a real commercial aspect and a requirement for commercial acumen, right? In terms of, if this is your if you have a product or a service or a platform that you are looking to integrate, there is a mutual beneficial with you and external party in that collaboration. So how do we leverage that? How do you as a business see the value in me as a customer, not just as a transaction, but in also what I can bring and what our partnership could bring to our mutual, for mutual benefit. So there is a real there's a real skill in those types of negotiations with external parties, but they are critical. And I would encourage everyone. It's not a place where most people feel technically comfortable, but it is ultimately, it's hard to as a business owner or as a business director, if you are being presented with, here's a way that we can do something really brilliant for our people, and guess what, I'm actually saving you X amount per year. Like who's saying no to that? In reality. However, I have had times where we have not been aligned, and sometimes it's I see it, but it's a not right now. So I can see and understand the benefit, but it's not right now, either because of timings or resource, or the broader economic kind of climate, or indeed the financial positioning of the business. And when it's a no, not right now, we like I said earlier, we roll with the punches in this department, and that is okay. I believe you me, that is on next month after, that is on the list for that point. So I will be bringing it back to the table each and every time. I believe it's really important. There have been instances where I don't think this is a cost that we can support, and that's more challenging, especially when you feel and you're really passionate that it is the right thing to do, or there is an impact to people. There is a meaningful a meaningful impact to individuals. Where that has occurred, I have gone away and thought about it in a different way. So that has been okay. Instead of this being a cost to the business, how do I negotiate with third party to actually bring this in at a nil cost to the group? Because if I can bring it in at a nil cost, it's something that's the only sticking point from the organization is the cost of it. Everything else we agree with. So it's about going back and redefining, thinking about, well, can I have certain parts of the product? Could I have access to the product for 12, 24 months? Can we collaborate? Can we do some sort of joint campaign, joint, PR? Just really think about it. And I think that comes from, I am nothing if not tenacious and maybe a bit belligerent. But, if I do believe that something is the right thing to do, I will find a way to get it. If I believe it's the right thing for teams and people. And it just means me having to be a bit creative to find our path there.
Yeah, I mean, your tenacity does shine through in terms of everything that you mentioned through the call today. Honestly, and I've written down creativity here when you were talking, so saying it's so clear that is your creativity, how you approach these situations, right? And I think I really resonate with what you said around kind of that partnership being a very key word, and that collaboration between yourselves and a provider, and that mutually beneficial relationship. Because for me, maybe being someone sat on the other side of that, it is about collaborating and understanding each other's needs. And actually, like you say, again, zooming out and saying, okay, well, it's not possible right now. What are the sticking points? How can I help from my side to unblock them for you? Because it's going to be beneficial for my commercial team in the same way that it's beneficial for your business, for us to reach kind of a mutually beneficial agreement. And like you say, I think sometimes people are afraid to ask, or it feels unnatural to have that discussion.
Yeah.
If you work in a people team, you work with people, all it is having a conversation with another human or person around how we can both, achieve what we set out to do together.
You're exactly right, Molly, and it's so interesting to hear kind of your perspective again from the other side of that, and how welcomed that is. It is about partnership. Well, it is for me, and clearly it also is for you guys. It is about us partnering together for an end, an end outcome. It clearly has commercial benefit, for all parties, but fundamentally we've agreed on we want to do this for people. So it's the worst thing that's ever going to happen when you have those types of conversations is that someone says, no, we can't do that, but we can do. I have yet to have a no, we can't do that, full stop.
Yeah.
That's just not. If I did ever have that, I would be inclined to go as far as to say that that's not the right partner that I'm actually looking for. They can't see the value in our partnership from a reciprocal perspective, and I would probably discount them, to be quite honest, simply on that basis. But I haven't had that, and I think that's really important for people to challenge themselves on. To challenge others.
Yeah, I always say, and I'm speaking to individuals in that setting, I always ask for full transparency, because if you're transparent with me, I can help you, or I can do my best to help you, or we can meet in the middle, but I'm going to help you because you've asked and you've been honest with me. Whereas often if people don't tell you the truth of what's happening in the business or what the feedback has been, it makes it really difficult to be able to, again, the other way, like sort of partner with that business, because actually you're not allowing me to potentially support you in the way that I could. So really interesting. And I think the other part you mentioned at sort of the start of this question was kind of redistributing investments as well. So maybe a case of not doing more with less, but doing better with what you have available to you, which is really interesting as well. To look at it from that perspective, rather than budgets are being cut here, the market's changing, I don't have this available to me. It's actually looking at, okay, well, I've got X amount, or I've got this happening over here that's maybe not working. Like, how can I redistribute those funds to be beneficial to all parties?
Yeah, and the key to that is the constant understanding and revision and iterations thereof. You should never be implementing something and walking away as job well done, and that is from as small as a something that runs for a day or runs throughout a year. This is for anything that we implement into organizations. You have to implement, and it's that feedback loop. It's ultimately going, well, is it doing what I thought it was going to do? Is it because I've not given it long enough to embed? How do I better embed it? How do I better get usage out of it? Do people know about it? Like, a big part of all of this is communications, and that again is part of that golden thread. You can have the best reward strategy in the world, and if no one knows about it, it's worthless. So that communication in a way that resonates with individuals is clearly an important aspect of reward.
Yeah, I mean, it's often a challenge that we hear as well around the communication piece of, like, you could have invested all of your funds into the best reward strategy out there, but like you say, if no one actually is engaging with it and you're not getting that return on investment, then the business strategy side of things might not be happy. But equally, are your people happy if they're not actually, if they don't know what's out there, they don't know that reward's available, and then you find out in an exit interview, for example, well, I'm leaving because there wasn't X, Y, and Z benefit, but it actually does exist. It's just not been communicated in the right way. It's interesting to hear.
And I do think it's, that is an aspect all businesses struggle on to some degree. There is comms. I mean, most businesses still heavily rely on emails, to speak directly to colleagues. Not everyone has access to apps or any kind of fancy communication software, that reaches we've had at points of my tenure, nearly 4,000 employees. Knowing the most effective way to communicate with each and every one all of the time is dynamic. And I'm certainly not saying that I have the answer and we have, nailed it as a business. It is an evolving piece, but it's something that is really critical for people. So again, that goes back to that holistic view of, CSR and reward with quite a large segment of the organization that's not necessarily confined to just people. It is business excellence. It is, you will get people that are leaving the business because they are just frustrated with process, frustrated with bureaucracy, and that is, you could have a really leaky bucket on the basis of not having not having business excellence. That's ultimately also part of my current remit. So it's interesting. I think where the business was heading was a much larger an understanding of what we think is on the horizon, in this space, and how we can best position all of these facets by actually having a single custodian who clearly collaborates extensively, but having that as a six so that you can see the full, the full view.
Yeah, and it all ties quite nicely into what you said about embracing change, that kind of dynamic approach to embracing that things will change. Businesses don't stay static. It's just how you can best adapt and have, like you say, custodian like yourself whose finger is on the pulse and is always looking out onto the horizon, who can help to facilitate that across the business as well. Okay, so I'm excited to hear this one from you. What's the best cultural initiative that you've seen implemented across any business? And I always say this can be something that you've implemented yourself, you've seen someone else implement in a brand that you've worked in, or it can be one that you've seen another brand or organization do really well.
There's lots outside of the business, but I am going to be really not very modest, and I am going to use an example of something that we have implemented. And that is the Ripple suicide prevention tool. So it's Ripple are a not-for-profit organization, and what we did was ultimately implement via Wi-Fi. It's a tool that it's a discrete tool that sits within the network, essentially, that when people are searching for harmful terms, and this is a bank of tens of thousands of words and phrases that's intelligently learning all the time. So when people are searching for harmful terms, harmful content, that there is it's kind of infiltrated with a message of hope. So first of all, it pauses the search. It doesn't stop the search, but it pauses it, and it says about a message of hope, and it gives resources available right then and there, specific, available via text, via phone, and kind of just at people's most vulnerable is a kind of it's a final flag. Now that from my perspective, we engaged with Ripple quite extensively, and we have done for about 2 years now. So we introduced this tool to sit within our Wi-Fi network that was available for teams. So anybody using, any of our teams using Wi-Fi, searching for harmful terms would see these messages. Now, I think I'm always struck by how people don't necessarily see the need for that type of safeguarding from an employer, because who is going into work, going on the Wi-Fi and searching for harmful? The answer is a lot of people. There are Ripple as a tool, it doesn't store any data, but what Ripple have had is over 30 people contact them directly to say this actually saved my life in this moment. They've only been about since 2022, and it's a really interesting business or charity that was founded by a lady called Alice. She's actually got an OBE now as a result of her work in the charity, but it's ultimately a tech piece, but it's saved countless lives. The most often time from their data set, the time at which people most often search for these harmful things at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday.
Wow.
So if you believe that people aren't going into work and searching for this type of content, believe me that you are wrong. We have in hospitality, Ripple commissioned quite an extensive study within hospitality in particular, because for our subset, for our demographic, and this is why I think it's one of the best that I have seen in terms of what's out there. We have the highest death rate in the UK for suicide within the 18 to 25 age category. That is both our employee demographic, but also our guest demographic. We're a hospitality business, we're bars, pubs, late night. So it's important not just for our teams to make sure that they are getting supported, but also for the people who are attending our venues and who might also be searching for content like that. I truly believe that we have a responsibility to safeguard in that it should not be as we shouldn't allow within a couple of clicks someone to have access to a manual on how to harm themselves or take their own life. Alice founded this tech. Her experience is in tech and is in digital cyber, but her brother took his life. But he took his life, and she had access to his digital platforms and stuff after, and actually she could see that he had been searching for this type of stuff for quite a while. From my perspective, one of the reasons why I felt like this was such an important initiative was we had a couple of colleagues throughout my tenure who had died by suicide, but specifically at the end of 2022, someone within the people team, a very close friend of mine for about 10 years, she was 33 years old, and she took her own life. And at that point was kind of when I felt like, if somebody in the people team who has very close access to the support that is available, to understanding, was also MHFA accredited. If they super sunshine yellow personality, wonderful people professional, but if they were in that position in their lives, like, what are we doing for everybody else, and how are we helping that? Now, what it also does as a tool, Ripple, is it provides businesses with a category listing of the amount of times search terms are used. So it will flag. So there is no traceable information. But what it does flag are kind of really important categories. So there's a list of probably 40 or 50 categories, and it shows the number of searches via the Wi-Fi network. Why that's really important for me as someone in reward is I can see when there is spiking gambling searches, so you might see around Cheltenham, Grand National time, and that's where it's super important that from a well-being perspective, we are tailoring our support. Also, when there are kind of debts, financial services, alcohol, other there are all of these categories that can really help support your agenda in terms of targeting at the right time the support that people need. This isn't a one-stop shop. You implement a financial well-being provision and you stop there. Actually, Ripple provides the means to really target specifically when we see spikes in certain search terms. So I think that is, for me personally, the best cultural initiative that I have implemented. But I wanted to showcase it because I genuinely don't believe that there should be a open Wi-Fi available within this country that doesn't have a safeguarding mechanism. And I truly believe that. And Ripple are absolutely unbelievable in terms of partners and what they what they bring. So certainly something that I would encourage people to take a look at.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for sharing that. I found that really powerful, listening to you talk on that. And I'm so sorry to hear about your experience with suicide. I mean, Alice sounds like a very, very inspiring individual and clearly has done something incredible.
Interestingly enough, that's where I heard about the provision. I was attending the Inspirational Women's Awards in Manchester in 2023, and that's she was up for an award, and that is where I first heard of the provision. She actually didn't win the award, which tells you the caliber of kind of inspirational women that were in the room and in attendance at that time. But yeah, she certainly is a driving force behind
mission-led business, right? In terms of like from the very core of it, not just we have a mission, this is what it is. It's like she personifies and embodies that entire mission, and clearly has achieved some incredible and impactful results with that quite selflessly as well. And I think on what you said around the business, it's so important, as you said, to be utilizing tech not just for the benefit of the business, but for your people, and really deeply caring and safeguarding for your people outside of, you know, their day-to-day responsibilities. It's like respecting them, appreciating them, and looking after and caring for them to be able to bring their full selves to work. And I think it's so difficult sometimes as well, because you can have well-being strategies in place or financial well-being strategies that you say that are static, and actually it puts the onus sometimes on the individual to be proactive in reaching out to say, you know, their EAP, for example, to talk about their mental health. Whereas what I love about Ripple and what you described as well is the fact that you don't have to ask for it. It's almost like there's a bit of a silent cry for help, and it stops you in your tracks, and is almost sort of, in, you know, I guess in a technological way, representing yourself, where you can't be in every situation speaking to every single team member, but your voice is almost there or represented in some way to say, are you okay? And kind of slowing down that process.
Are you okay? Let's take 10 seconds. Here's someone you can text. Here's the, you know, here's the number for CAM. Here's Samaritans. Have a moment, think about it, speak to someone. That's not always enough, clearly. But it is certainly, in my view, the minimum that we should be doing. Now, we said, you kind of referenced, and I just want to make sure I pick up on it, the fact that you know, this initiative is not necessarily for the business, you know, for people. But actually, I do see it in a very different way. It is also for the business, not just in the sense of the right thing to do. People having what's really important with reward is that employee value proposition. What do you as an organization stand for? What are your values? Now, you can say all these things, but if you're not espousing those, if you're not living by them, they don't mean anything to colleagues. And if you're not seeing that on the front line, your affinity is much harder to gain. Now, whilst there isn't a direct, you know, really direct link to this, implementation is going to attract X amount of people to the business, it's going to retain X amount of people, it makes you a attractive employer. You haven't got any of those real tangible direct links, right, to numbers, which clearly I love. You haven't got that, but what you do have is, if these are the things that we as a business are saying are important, so we are saying that this, you know, the psychological safety of our teams is important, we are saying that we do value them as individuals, we have to put our money where our mouth is. You know, we have to do that, because if you don't, it doesn't mean anything, and you are not attracting, retaining. So whilst I can't give you a number, whilst I can't say this is the, you know, the ROI of this investment, the ROI is, it's the right thing to do, but actually there are all of these ancillary benefits that support us in espousing our brand and our values and who we are as an employer, and that leads to affinity first and foremost. So there is a business benefit. We have to make sure we can articulate that, you know, well to C-suite when we are implementing things that aren't necessarily directly linked to a business benefit.
Thank you for correcting me on that, because I think that's actually a really important message to get out there in terms of like how you articulate and how you present initiatives, you know, to the business, and how it benefits both sides, particularly when it comes to things like values or the culture of the business, where you have to kind of embody those and find it difficult to maybe lift them off the page or lift them off kind of, you know, the staff rooms at the back of, you know, the site or whatever it might be. Like, to actually live and breathe them is really difficult. So that's really important as well. But yeah, thank you so much, Danielle. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I could talk to you for hours around all of this.
It's really enjoyable taking a moment to just really press pause and and think about it when you're not in the thick of it. So yeah, thanks. I've really enjoyed it as well.